And the session, every time, the session of this, or this session is entitled Art for Everyone. And it's specifically, we are looking at the novice level because truly we believe art can be used at all levels. And it's usually easier to reach the higher levels, but novice tends to be always the trickiest level, and how can we make it accessible for them as well. So a quick housekeeping item that you could do for us. Later on in the session, we hope to be able to offer a breakout room for you to brainstorm and work together. If you can just modify your name to help it easier for our host, just adding the language that you would prefer to engage in. So for example, if you teach Spanish, you could put SP in front, or FR for French, or GE for German, or CH for Chinese, whatever. If you teach multiple languages, just pick the one that you would prefer to engage in for our host. And then if our lovely hosts would be able to organize those breakout rooms, we will have those hopefully at the end of the session. Okay. All right. So why art? Let's get started. Art, first and foremost, is a form of communication itself. Art, the artists depict events in history. They will often represent cultural traditions, or even personal views of the behaviors within a culture. The artists translate those experiences, and they help take what could often be what is an abstract concept and make it more accessible for our students. Art also, we can use it to hit all five C's for ACTFL, and hopefully it stimulates higher level thinking, which, if many of us have AP programs, we always consider AP a program and not just a course. And so if we're helping students to learn how to make inferences early on, make those connections and cultural comparisons, those are all very essential, not just in AP, but in communication as a whole. So we hope that art can do that for our students. And we recognize that while not every student loves art, we're not trying to make our classroom a museum. There are a lot of students who do appreciate art, and we want to have a diverse way of meeting all of our students and their interests. So when our students are engaging in art, of course, it's pretty easy to engage in interpretive and presentational communication, but as students are engaging in communication, they can be sharing their perspectives and their own observations, and so it can be an interpersonal experience as well. Art, of course, provides a window into the culture. It contextualizes those events in history, or captures what is important to the artist, and it gives us an idea of what was going on in the moment. Art, of course, connects. It connects across all disciplines. We're using art, so students can, use art terminology if they're able to have that, but it also allows them to make personal connections to the content. In terms of comparisons, when we're looking at cultural comparisons here, we recognize that this is a great way to give cultural comparison and allow them to have that snapshot of a culture, but we also want to be careful not to overgeneralize. It's really easy to take one painting and say that this represents a culture, but that can be very dangerous at the same time. We're going to use one example in just a few seconds here of Fernando Botero, and if you're familiar with his work, he has a very unique way that he portrays his art, and we don't want our students to walk away thinking that everybody in Colombia is obese or something like that. So we have to be very careful that we don't overgeneralize or typify a culture at the same time.
Okay, so just a couple of thoughts to get us started looking at some specific examples of art, and diving a little bit into what we hope our students will walk away with as well. As Nate said at the beginning, that art is a form of communication. And so we can consider that just like when authors write and they're sharing their histories and their experiences and their cultures with us through their writing, artists are doing the same thing. And so some of these quotes sort of exemplify that. Painting is just another way of keeping a diary, according to Pablo Picasso. And to my mind, one does not put oneself in place of the past, one only adds a new link. And I love that idea, not just for art, but also for who our students are, and thinking about how they might place themselves in the world. And finally, Rufino Tamayo said, art is a means of expression that must be understood by everybody, everywhere. It grows out of the earth, the textures of our lives and our experience. What better reason to have our students engage in art in the classroom than that? So what does it look like to study art at the novice level when it seems like they can say so little? How can we really have them explore art in a meaningful way? Because as Nate said, it's not just about, so sometimes it is just about exposure. And that really can be where you begin, is that they just use it. Maybe you don't even teach anything about the art itself, but you use it as an opportunity for them to describe something, let's say. So you can see images, just using art as images, just like you might use a photo from the internet or famous people that they might recognize. You can do the same thing with art. You can put up a well-known painting or a lesser known painting, and they're listing the colors they see, something as simple as that. And so sometimes it is just about exposure, but we can go deeper even at the novice level. And that can range from simple artist biographies. Nate will talk in just a moment, like he said, about Fernando Botero, and we have the kids say really simple things about him, where he's from, the things that he likes to do, the things that are interesting to him, how old he is because he's still alive. So there are certain things that we can incorporate from very basic, very foundational language courses. And we can have students engage in interpretive activities related to the artists themselves, not just the paintings. Again, quotes like what we just looked at, I'm using some of that to help students work through vocabulary, associate those quotes with different painting and artists. It allows us to sort of prompt students through both words and images and ask them to respond. And one of the things that Nate and I also, like, we do art all throughout. As he said, we sort of see AP, and even if our classes didn't have the designation AP, or some schools have IB, we really see what we offer at Manheim Central as a program. And so every level prepares, it gives the students a good experience, even if they're only taking that level, but it prepares them to be successful at the next level and hopefully then in college as well. And so we do use art at all the levels that we teach, and we do a variety of things with our students at every level. But like he said, we're focusing on the novice because sometimes it can be a little bit more intimidating to take on novice level students and activities. I do want to say before we jump in now to our first examples that number one, all of our examples are from our Spanish classrooms, but we do plan to give you a little bit of time with your language of choice to be able to talk about how it might be relevant to artists from your own target language. And also, we're showing two examples of the many, many, many things that we do. And you may have seen them before if you've seen us present. We've shared snippets of some of the things that we do, but hopefully you'll get a little bit of a deeper understanding of what we're sharing. And again, it's just two examples of a lot of what we do in both our novice courses and in some of our other courses as well.
All right, so as Megan said, we're going to get started. We have two examples. And the only thing I'll add to what Megan said about what we're going to show you here is that our goal is always in our presentations to provide inspiration, not to necessarily give you exactly what we do. Obviously, if you don't teach French or Spanish, you really can't use this, but hopefully you'll get an idea of how it can be approached in your language. So our first example will be Fernando Botero, and Fernando Botero definitely has a unique way of portraying people. He has a particular style, and this captures our students' attention really quickly. Before we even get into his work, we use them sometimes as warm-up activities, and we don't even talk about what those pictures are, but the students see them, they complete the activity, they describe it or something, and we don't even comment necessarily about these obese characters in the picture. But so they may think that Senor Campbell and Professora Flinchbaugh are a little odd or have an odd taste in art. But within a few days, we get to the reason for why we were using those items. So you're probably familiar with Actable's can-do statements, and it's been our goal over the past few years to incorporate these as much as possible into our program, specifically for goal setting as much as we can. And these two particular can-do statements highlight the need for identifying artists and musicians, their styles and contributions to art, and also are students able to identify products that would reveal a stereotype or an exaggerated view of the culture. And Botero is great for offering an exaggerated perspective in order to highlight social concerns from his home country of Colombia. Okay, so as I already kind of prefaced here, in our earlier activities, before we get into our big Botero part of the unit, we use some of his paintings just as warm-up activities or extending activities to learn new vocabulary. But eventually we do a more formal presentation with the students that's structured and guided. Lately, we've been using Pear Deck. It's a great resource. It's not this presentation is about, but it's a great way to engage students and get them looking at the art and highlighting specific things so that it's right in front of them on the computer screen. And we do that in the same classroom, not just through Zoom, but it's great for Zoom too if you're virtual. When we're looking at his work more holistically, we're able to elicit specific responses that guide students to those can-do statements. And eventually we get to an interpretive text that we use to help students identify and understand who Fernando Botero is. And so this activity that we have on the screen here takes an authentic text. It's a biographical text that we've divided up in, it's structured by paragraph. You might notice the paragraph number there. And it's accompanied by a worksheet that includes a pre-reading activity. The pre-reading activity focuses on vocabulary, key vocabulary for understanding the article. It also highlights the idea of cognates and gets students looking at the text as skimming through, highlighting what they do know, and then making inferences about other things. And then there's structured reading throughout, and it's focusing on just key elements, very basic elements that they would understand. If you didn't catch it before on the previous slide, this is actually just our third unit. So they have had very little Spanish up until this point already. At this point, we've looked at basic descriptions, what's your name, where are you from, likes and dislikes, and some activities, but not a whole lot beyond that. So those are the things that we're focusing on, and they're able to still pick up a lot. As Megan mentioned, a lot of them are surprised that he's still alive, and they have learned how to ask and express age so they can comment, Fernando Botero tiene 89 años, he's 89 years old. Wow, and that somehow impresses them that he's 89 and still producing art. All right, next slide. Our three main focuses when we're in this unit for Fernando Botero are exposing students to the language, giving them an opportunity to do an interpretive reading, and then it culminates with a presentational task. And that task will be speaking and writing, which we'll get to here in a second. When they're looking at and describing the paintings, they're doing basic identifications. They're using their vocabulary that they know to say, there is a man, there is a woman, there is a boy. They might be identifying key objects. They know some animals like cat and dog, horse, and things like that. They've just received personality and physical characteristic traits because they've learned in Spanish the verb ser, to be. So they're able to describe what people look like, what they infer them to be like based on maybe the action within the painting. And then, of course, they know basic colors. So they are very happy to point out all the colors because those are easy things for them to identify as well. And then there's simple questions. They can use the title of the painting to identify maybe the origin or the name. They can refer to the date then that it was produced, but they can also comment on likes and dislikes. So if they see maybe a band of musicians playing instruments, they can infer that the men like to play musical instruments. And on our vocabulary list, we even have some of those instruments listed. As we looked at just in the previous slide, they complete an interpretive reading. So they already get an authentic text that they're getting key information from that they're going to later use in their presentational piece when they have to select a painting from Botero. And they need to first write a short, for their writing presentation of that piece, they'll select the painting, they'll write a short paragraph, 5-6 sentences about the life of Botero. They can glean that information from the text that they have already read, or they can research some new information as well to include in that. And then they have to write a second paragraph that just describes a painting, similar to what we've already done in practice multiple times in class. And then finally, they'll present that description to the class using a Google slide. They'll put the painting with the title, the year, and then they're allowed to put key vocabulary words on the screen to help prompt them in their description. And it's a very, very basic presentation. We're not talking, big art AP style presentation. It is as simple as, this is what I see. There is a horse. There is red color. They'll go through all the colors because that's easy. They'll name what they see, and then they'll talk about the likes, dislikes, and that's pretty much the presentation. It's usually less than a minute or so. But it's a good first exposure to A, presenting in the class, and B, using all the entire target language to share information to the class. And I'm gonna let you go to the next slide.
Yes, I wanted to actually just interject something here before we move on. And that is just to say that we, like we said, we know all of our examples are in Spanish, but, and I think we also recognize that every curriculum takes a different path, but this is something that I think is very accessible to many of you, regardless of the language that you teach. It's not that the Botero biography was particularly accessible to students, but through the activity that we created, the accompanying worksheet that we created, we made it accessible to students. And, students describing a painting, whether you have them do that presentationally or even interpersonally, it is something that can be really accessible. So again, hopefully some of these ideas you can jot down or think about as you, as we move through, and hopefully get a chance to discuss them with some colleagues later.
All right, thank you for adding that. Additionally, so just as a quick review, and I'll go through this page pretty quickly, these are the elements that the students essentially are able to do when mine Spanish here, Spanglish. But when they are moving into their presentational mode, they're able to do basic conversations. They've learned the verb gustar, in other words, how to express what pleases them or is pleasing to others. It's the verb ser, that's our big verb to be, to describe characteristics. And then they've learned all the ways to use that vocabulary to identify the objects, the people, and then of course, they're identifying the culture. And so they use all those things to build their presentation. And I've already described this. The last slide here is a sample of what that looks like. There's an actual student sample here of the paragraphs that they submit. This is the written piece. And they would take this picture and they would have this on the screen. Again, they're allowed up to 10 keywords in Spanish. We actually allow them 10 keywords in English so that they can make reference. It can prompt their mind. We encourage them to use the English for words they already know in Spanish, and then maybe keywords in Spanish that they can point to in the picture that would be new words possibly for their crowd. So if they don't know the word tree yet, they could have árbol in Spanish, árbol is tree. And so they might reference that word, but then they point to it in the picture so that the class also then can share in the understanding of what that word means. One thing I just want to note before we finish with the sample is at the end of these presentations, students have also received a paper that allows them to reflect on the entirety of Botero's artwork. And we actually have them, all the presentations are collected in one Google slide presentation, and students can go back in and they can identify we ask them to identify 4 works, write down some key components of the 4 works that they like. And then we have perspectives that are already defined for them to match up. How does this painting illustrate the perspective that we studied when we talked about Botero? So is this a social criticism? Is it representing, inequalities between men and women, or whatever the perspective is? We work through that. And then we actually have on the back side of that, after they do that in the target language, they do an English reflection as well, where they can talk about, connect it with their own culture and perspectives. Anything you want to add to that, Megan?
Yeah, just wanted to say that, yeah, like Nate said, we support their language by giving them those perspectives and just kind of have them check off what they think, where they think there might be connections. And we are very much in the camp of use as much target language as you can all the time, over 90%. But this is one area where we do let them elaborate a little bit what they're thinking by adding a few comments in English at the end. And also, I do want to point out, like, obviously, this student example, it's not like they're writing perfectly. If you understand Spanish, you can see, well, first of all, you can see the red underlines, no? But you can also see, if you understand Spanish, that there are mistakes in here. And so it's certainly not perfect, but it's pretty impressive for a Spanish 1 student in October. We are proud of the work that they can do because we've really guided their participation up until this point, and we've tried to put in place enough building blocks to help them be successful. So right after that unit, right when kids are probably either, breathing a sigh of relief because their first presentation in Spanish is over, or hopefully patting themselves on the back also because they just gave a presentation in Spanish, we move right into Unit 4, which for us is a unit about families. And we ask the students throughout the unit to consider their own family or their own community, for kids who may not be interested in talking about their own families in their community, and Mexican families. And this is another area where we try really hard to not say this is what Mexican families are like, or this is what traditions Mexican families celebrate. We sort of try to paint this as these are things that some Mexican families might celebrate, and maybe some in the United States and some back in Mexico. And this is one family. If you were at Rebecca Bluewolf's keynote presentation yesterday, she talked about using the rule of 3, the idea being that, like, when you have the opportunity to provide 3 separate examples of something so that kids don't paint something with a broad brush. So, one of the things that we do also is we have like an infographic that we share with the students often after we do this bit of art, just so that they can see what modern Mexican families statistically look like, and how that might be similar or different to what they've seen in the paintings. And it just helps them to understand that just because they saw it in one painting doesn't mean that now they can overgeneralize it out to all Mexican families, for example. Again, looking at our can-do statements for intercultural can-do statements, these are some of the things that we try to hit. And in the end, I think that many students would be able to walk away saying these things. Again, we're trying to not have them paint with a broad brush and say that, they can now identify how all Mexicans celebrate local and national holidays or festivals, but to have some idea of how some people in the target culture might do those things. So some of you may be familiar with the artist Carmen Lomas Garza, who is a native Texan actually, but her family from Mexico, and she writes and paints a lot about family life, and of course, like particularly her family life or her community life. And so we've chosen 4 paintings that we have the students look at that nicely represent some of the things that her family does together. And so you can see in this one, they are making empanadas together. And this one, this lesson it takes a couple of days on block. And we're fortunate because this painting is actually accompanied by stories that she has written alongside a co-author, and the stories are published in her books, and they are bilingual books, so there are some paragraphs in Spanish translated into English. So I recognize that in other languages, maybe you don't have such a nice, neat package that you would be able to pull from. But again, hopefully some of these ideas you can take and work with them. So the way that we do this one is that first, we actually do what you would see on the right side of your screen, which is that we project the painting on the screen. And then we just have kids do some identification, some really basic identification. It really builds confidence and it makes them feel comfortable with the painting that they're seeing before they have to do anything that's kind of difficult. So, you know, what colors do you see in the picture, in the painting? We just the day before doing this lesson would have introduced family members. So, you know, now think back to those family members that you identified yesterday and who might these people be? Like, we don't know, but who might they be? And so kids will write, you know, like Nate said before, they're ready to write the colors. That's so easy, but they also do the same thing with the family members because they're just guessing. So it's even easier. They don't even have to be right. You know, it just has to kind of make some sense. And then we have them describe people because we just came off that unit. So it kind of bridges back to the previous unit. And once we've looked at that all together and the kids feel really confident about it, we move into an interpretive piece, and that's over on the left-hand side of the screen. And what you're seeing there is actually the reading that goes along with another painting called Cascarones. And so they read a little bit about their about the painting that they're looking at. And we have them do this for both. So they look at it, they identify colors, and they describe the people and whatnot, and then they do the reading about it. So they would have already looked at this for Cascarones, the other painting. And that's a painting of a family that is like painting Mexican Easter eggs and filling them with confetti. And so after they look at it and describe it, then they read the storybook entry, if you will, that goes along with it, and they answer some specific questions. So again, it's kind of like a nice, neat little package for us because it all comes together, and it was rather easy for us to take the art and then also add this interpretive piece to it. But then we have the kids answer these questions. And this isn't something that we collect and evaluate. We really just do use this as a learning activity, and we review it, and we do it as a class, as a lesson, not as an assessment. However, during all of this, and oftentimes even when the kids are working on some of the things with Fernando Botero, but more particularly in this unit, we do allow them to work together, and we encourage them to work together using the target language so that they're also doing some interpersonal speaking as well. And so no, there's not an information gap. There's not always negotiation of meaning in that sense, but they are communicating about the art. You know, they'll say to each other the names of the family members that they think are there, or when they're answering questions about the text that they're reading, they're sharing their opinions, and they're disagreeing sometimes, and they're presenting their own ideas. And so there is true communication happening. Like I said, it's not in a traditional information gap way, but it is happening. So you can see that that's kind of how that plays out. And so just kind of like with Botero, you can see the different things that we are trying to hit when we do this. We want to have them describe things. So we want to have them use language. We want to have them engage in some cultural comparisons, and even some personal comparisons. One of the things that we do after we do the initial lesson, we have them look at yet another painting called Conejo. And after they do that, we give them a little grid where they just have to mark off, like we have a couple of different activities, like making empanadas, making homemade tortillas, what different like celebrations, how families in the paintings use confetti in their Easter eggs. And we have them mark off, like, what do you see in the paintings by Carmen Lomas Garza, and what happens in your own family? And they sort of do just like a checklist comparison. And then we go over it, and it's really fun for us to talk about, like, do you eat rabbit? You know, because Carmen's family eats rabbit. Do you eat rabbit? And the kids are like, horrified at the idea that somebody could eat a horse or a rabbit, you know, but we have some fun conversations about that. And it's a really great opportunity to say, like, cultures are just different. It's not weird. It's not strange. It's just different. And so we do some of that. And then we do actually do a final assessment piece with this, where we have them then look at another painting, look at another reading, and we use that as an interpretive assessment for them. But our primary goal with this is to engage the students not only in that interpersonal and interpretive piece, but also to gain some cultural awareness. And this is some of the other stuff that we talked about. So it allows us to sort of open the door, you know, so that then when they move to Spanish 2 and they're studying food and they're looking at food from other countries, you know, they're not just thinking that, you know, all Mexican food is Hispanic food and vice versa. It just sort of gives them some foundation to understand that like we don't paint with a broad brush. And so it's as much grammar as it is vocabulary as it is culture. So at this point, like we said, we understand that, of course, all of our examples are in Spanish and also related to our specific curriculum. But certainly we hope that there are things that you could take away from this that you might feel could be useful to you in your own classroom, even if it's just one snippet. We always like to say that if we can walk away from a presentation with one idea that we feel like we can implement the next time we're planning lessons, we'll feel really happy about that, even if we have to tuck away the rest until we have more time to explore them. So that's what we'd like to give you some time to do. So we're thinking, obviously you won't be able to see the screen when you're in your breakout rooms. So just tuck away that we would like for you to discuss based on your language of choice that you chose to have in your breakout room, different artists that you might be able to use, different kinds of lessons that you might be able to engage your students in, or even more generally, some standards and objectives that maybe you could hit using different activities. And, we're talking about our Spanish 1 classes, but, maybe you'd like to try to incorporate more in your German 2 class or something. So what levels do you think might be appropriate? So those are just some ideas. Feel free to talk about whatever part of the presentation makes most sense. And we'll come back in maybe about 6 minutes, probably about 6 minutes or so, so that you have a chance to share back out and ask some questions.
Okay, and I made an executive decision as your colleagues, as your colleague, as you are my colleagues, that I just created breakout rooms with German, Spanish, French, and other, so that everybody can join the one that's appropriate for them. So please feel free that if you're in, for instance, like the other language room and there's no one there, to just leave that and join a new one. So I'm going to open all rooms right now. And please join the most appropriate room for your situation. Thank you. Leslie, you're Spanish. I can just put you right in the Spanish room.
Thank you.
Tarja, I can also put you in a room if you let me know which one is appropriate for you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. German.
Okay, great. I'll stick you right there.
Hopefully that's a good sign. They're all just chatting.
I know. I
Really
got caught up in all my
brainstorming.
own. Yeah. There it goes.
Welcome back, everybody. That brings us pretty close to the end of our session already. 45 minutes goes somehow much faster than an hour, but we want to thank you very much for joining us, for tuning in on a Thursday evening after you've probably already spent a long day working. We really appreciate having you here. And you can see our email addresses are there on the screen in front of you. So please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. Hopefully we can help.
And on behalf of PSMLA, we want to thank everyone for attending this session with Megan Flinchbaugh, my colleague, and Nate Campbell, my husband and colleague. And we welcome and encourage your feedback on our sessions. Please use the link in the PDF program or found in the chat to give this session feedback. The recording of this session will be available to conference registrants after this event. As a reminder for teachers in Pennsylvania, in order to qualify this session for Act 48 credit, you must complete the Act 48 reflection form. You can find the Act 48 form linked in the PDF or in the chat. These forms should be completed within 72 hours of this session. Thank you and enjoy the rest of our virtual conference. If you have questions, you are welcome to message Megan and or Nate at those email addresses. And we look forward to seeing you at future sessions. Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.